All right, well, welcome. My name is Gladys Cornell and I'm with AIM Consulting, and we are assisting the city of Roseville on the commercial corridor plans. There's 3 of them. And I will be doing introductions here shortly of the project team, but we're very excited. I know many of you were involved in the first meeting, and quite a number of you were involved in the walking tour and provided us a significant amount of feedback and input on these plans. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you did with us. And again, thank you for joining us this evening. We are excited to share the new project updates that the City of Roseville's planning staff have been working on for these 3 key corridors within Roseville. Just as a reminder, the corridors include Atlantic Street, Douglas Boulevard and Harding Boulevard, and then Douglas Boulevard and Sunrise Avenue. Tonight, we have 3 main goals that we would like to accomplish. We would like to discuss with you the land use plan, and then also share and discuss conceptual streetscape plans that we have. And then we would really just like to answer any questions and talk to you about the corridors. So with that, I thought maybe just give you a quick little meeting orientation. I know probably most of you have now participated in at least one Zoom meeting, but you might have noticed that when you entered, you are on mute. The reason we do this is so that we don't have any extraneous background noise that kind of cuts the presentation, and then everyone can't hear what's being presented. However, we do encourage you while we're doing the presentation, if questions pop up or questions come to mind that you would like to share with us, you can certainly do it in the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. You might want to go ahead and just click that now, and the chat box will pop up. And you don't need to wait to ask your questions or make your comments. You can share them, as we're doing our presentation. We will be monitoring the chat box, and then at certain points during this meeting, we will pause and go through the chat box and share the questions and the comments that we have. We can also, at that time, if you would prefer to ask your question or make your comment verbally yourself, you are more than welcome to raise your virtual hand, and I'll explain where that's at. So Zoom does not have it if you're on a different device, if you're on a computer, a tablet, or a phone. It's at different locations. So we have several examples of where that raised hand icon is. If you're on the phone, it's at the bottom of your screen in the 3 dots that say more. Just click on that and it'll show raised hand. You can click that and your virtual hand will be raised. On a tablet, same thing, 3 dots, click that. If it's on a computer, you can do it in a couple of different locations. You can do it at the participant icon, or you can do it at the reactions icon. And if you click any of those reactions, it can be, we will know that you want to ask a question. If you're on a phone that is, like not a smartphone, and you'd like to ask a question verbally, then please hit *9. And that will raise your virtual hand. And when we call on you, all you need to do is press *6, and then it will unmute you, and we can hear your question. I'd also like to just mention that after this meeting, if you have any other sort of aha moments, or you just want to re-emphasize your comments or your questions, please feel free to email us at corridorplans@roseville.ca.us. And we will be monitoring that as well. Okay. So tonight, as I mentioned, we'd like to just remind everybody, as I mentioned, we know that a number of you have been involved in this project as we've undertaken it. But for those who maybe are new to it, we'd like to introduce the Roseville Commercial Corridors project to you again, share the land use and streetscapes, answer any questions you have, and then let you know, we'll wrap up the meeting and let you know what the next steps are. I'd also like to just let you know that this meeting is being recorded, and we will have the recording up. Give us a little bit of time, maybe a week or so, and we should have that up on the city's website at this particular web page. So if you go to the city's website, which is www.roseville.ca.us /corridor plans, That's the web page for this project. And you can see everything that's been done to date in regards to the early technical work that's been done and also the community engagement work that's been done. So hopefully that's helpful for you. I'm going to quickly introduce the project team who's here tonight. So Lauren Hawker is with the City of Roseville, and she's the Planning Division project manager for this project. Jessica Lynch is also with the City of Roseville. Sean Morales is with the City of Roseville, and Shelby Maples is with the City of Roseville. Christine Anderson and Eric Smith are the consultants with Mark Thomas, and they assisted with the streetscape work. And then in addition to myself, Katie DeMeo and Esme Santana are with AIM Consulting and helping with the community engagement. Now we'd like to hear from you a little bit of information. So we're doing a live poll, and we have 3 questions for you. And we would love to hear your answers for these. So the first question, and Katie's going to pull up the poll, is, are you a resident near one of the 3 corridors? And if you just answer yes or no, we would appreciate that. And we'll just give it, you guys are good. You're moving through this quickly. So we'll just give it another few seconds. Okay. Might want to end that poll, and so you can see we have a significant number who live near the corridor, and that's great. And we also have a number who don't live near the corridor, and we appreciate your participation as well. So thank you so much. So the next question is, we'd like to know, which neighborhood do you live in? And so the options are Folsom Road, Harding, Hillcrest, Lead Hill, Maidu, Sierra Gardens. If you live in a different neighborhood, if you wouldn't mind, once you hit the other, sharing it in the chat box, what neighborhood you live in, that would be appreciated as well. So thank you for that. It gives us a good opportunity to use the chat box and also the live polling, because we'll be asking you some more questions about streetscapes with the live polling. So we truly appreciate that. Okay, so yeah, we have a really nice a grouping of different participants in many different neighborhoods. So that is wonderful. And then our last question for you is, what is your primary interest or perspective that you're bringing to this planning effort? Is it businesses, pedestrian or bicycle friendly design, access to transit, housing, public amenities, or other? And if you type other, if you wouldn't mind just sharing what that is, we would appreciate that as well. Okay. Again, we have quite a number. We have a number of different perspectives, which is always really great when we are doing collaborative work like this. So we really appreciate it. In addition to all of the perspectives, the businesses, pedestrian friendly, access to transit, housing, and public amenities, we have a number of people who are interested in active transportation, wayfinding and public transit, public safety, environmental impact on the creeks, change of zoning and impacts on my neighborhood and all of Central Roseville, historical impact, plan for schools. So really appreciate all of the perspectives. Okay. Katie, did you want to share those results since I've already kind of gone through them? Great. All right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over. As I mentioned, we will have do a quick overview of the project, and I'd like to ask Lauren Hawker and Jessica Lynch to begin the presentation. Oh, and Lauren, you're on mute.
Yep. And so the first thing I want to let you know is I am going to go ahead and shut off my video only to prevent lag issues because I was having a little bit of that early on. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my video while I am speaking. All right, so welcome. So this is our second virtual outreach meeting, but we recognize there may be folks joining us today who are new to the project. So we still want to begin the meeting with some background. After that, we'll also be talking about the land use information we published in December and about potential streetscape improvements. So this is a planning process where we work with all segments of the community to come up with a document that will lay out the vision for the future of these areas. Through this process, we have the opportunity to prioritize improvements and encourage revitalization of 3 of Roseville's older commercial corridors and their surrounding land uses, with vibrant and walkable streets, thriving businesses with retail and office spaces, community gathering places, and new housing options. The corridors we're focused on, as we've indicated, are Atlantic Street, Douglas Boulevard and Harding Boulevard, and Douglas Boulevard and Sunrise Boulevard, or Sunrise Avenue. So for context, let's talk about why we selected these corridors and how the project will work. And to talk to you about that, next is Jessica Lynch.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending and coming out here to hear what we have to say. So as Lauren said, why here, why now? Why did we choose these corridors and why are we doing it at this moment? As you are probably aware, the city went through a similar process of setting up revitalization plans for the Riverside area and for the city's downtown. And we've seen those be very successful. We've seen beautified streetscapes, public amenities, and thriving businesses come out of those plans. So the city council made the decision that they wanted to work on more commercial corridor revitalization plans as one of the city's strategic goals. These 3 corridors jumped out at us as perfect locations to implement similar improvements because they are connected to the city's downtown and to each other, and they act as major gateways into the city and to downtown. And in many cases, these corridors will be what people see as they head down Atlantic Street to go downtown from Harding or Interstate 80, or head from down Douglas to Maidu Regional Park, their offices, Folsom Lake, or the hospital. All of these areas are key gateways to the city. They are also part of established areas that would benefit from some reinvestment, and there are many opportunities to make quality of life improvements. As for why now, part of the reason is that the city was awarded state grant money for planning just like this. Note that the grant is not intended to fund construction of improvements or build any projects. Right now, it's just for planning for what could possibly happen in these corridors and setting a foundation, setting the stage for future projects. However, by going through the planning process right now and developing conceptual plans, we will be in a much better position to compete for future construction grant money. The corridor plans are what we refer to in planning as specific plans. But what does that mean? What can a specific plan do and not do? And we're going to talk about that right now. Next slide, please. I think Lauren came up with a great analogy to describe what a specific plan is to a non-planner. And I'm going to steal that right now. Imagine that you write yourself a 10-year plan to develop a vision of what you want to achieve in the next decade. Maybe you want to change your job. So then you sit down and figure out what is it going to take over the next 10 years to achieve that goal. Maybe you go back to school and get a degree or certificate or some other type of training, because that would help you be more competitive toward achieving your goal. But how can you find the time to do that? Perhaps you already work full-time and have children, and can you afford to go back to school? Do you have the time and the money? What would it take to get there? So there are a lot of different ways that something like that can play out. You could take night classes, you could take one class per semester, knowing that it's going to take you a longer time, or you could potentially just quit your job and finish school faster than you would otherwise. A specific plan makes 3 similar key points. 1, there's a lot of ways to get from point A to point B, and you need to really weigh your options and make decisions about how best to get where you want to be and what works best for your situation, given your needs and constraints. 2, having a plan isn't the end of the work, it's just the beginning. As I mentioned, that foundation earlier. It doesn't make any of the things that you planned actually happen. 3, plans are vitally important, but there's no guarantee that the next 10 years are going to look exactly like you'd planned, because there are always things outside of your control. And that's how that's basically what a specific plan does as well. Similar to your 10-year plan to change your career, a specific plan is a literal development plan for a certain geographic area. Developing a specific plan follows a similar process where you establish a vision and goals for the plan area and start developing things like a land use plan, like what kinds of land uses you expect to see where, and streetscape concepts that could turn into future projects and get us to our desired endpoint over the next 10 to 20 years. And in this case, we're wanting to see a revitalized corridor. The specific plans also include design standards for development and regulatory procedures on how to implement the projects as they come forward. We established vision statements for each plan back at our first community outreach meeting in June, and we used those vision statements to create the kind of communities for the kind of communities that you've asked for through some changes to land uses and streetscapes. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a little overview of the land use. Back in December, the city published maps on the project website showing the existing and proposed land uses and zoning for each of the 3 corridor plan areas. This is an example from the Douglas Harding plan area, which shows the existing zone districts. The thick black line that you see is where is the plan area boundary. The thin gray lines that you see within the plan area are the boundaries of each individual parcel or each property. And each color represents a different zone district, and each zone has different rules for how it can be developed and what kind of uses can be located there. When you look at the proposed zoning map, the parcels that the city is proposing a change on are surrounded by bright blue lines. So you can easily compare what the existing maps to the proposed map. And Lauren is going to show you an example of this in just a moment. So what's the difference between the land use maps and the zoning maps? The land use plan of either our general plan for the citywide development or a specific plan like these corridor plans describe the broad categories of land use permitted in a geographic area. Zoning, on the other hand, which is defined in what's called the zoning ordinance, implements the land use plan and provides significantly more detail about what uses are allowed and prohibited in each zone. The land use set designation and zone district of a given property are supposed to be compatible. Planners use the term consistent. So for example, if the land use is community commercial, then one of the commercial zone districts should be applied. This could vary from something like a large scale commercial, like what you find at the Galleria, to possibly something much smaller in scale, like a neighborhood type commercial use. As the city looked at the planning areas, we noticed some inconsistencies between land use and zoning, and inconsistency between the actual uses of the properties and their designated land use or zoning. We also noticed the presence of outdated zones that the city no longer uses. And when we run into things like this, when projects come forward, it can be a little bit of an administrative mess to fix. So if you wanted to bring something forward like a shed, and put a shed on your property, if we have the wrong zone on your property, it could cause a lot of problems and actually end up costing a lot more money and time. So this seemed like a great opportunity to fix some of these issues, to make things easier and streamline things for current owners of the properties that have these inconsistencies. So our proposed maps have tried to correct this, and Lauren is going to walk you through a specific example of how that looks right now.
Hi there again, everybody. So I chose this corner in Douglas and Harding because hopefully this is a corner that people will recognize. It's on Douglas Boulevard, right by Royer Park. So it's bounded by Park Drive and South Lincoln Street. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about what's there physically on the ground now, and then we're going to look at the existing and proposed zoning and the existing and proposed land use. So right now we have 2 office buildings right on Douglas Boulevard. And right behind those are two long, skinny parcels. One of those off of Park Drive has one home on it, and the other has 3 homes on it off of South Lincoln Street. Then there are 2 other parcels off of South Lincoln. One has 1 home, and the other is a vacant parcel, a very small parcel, only about 1/10 of an acre. So when we look at the next slide and we look at the existing and proposed zoning, we've got this in color so that you can see the differences. So in the existing condition, the pink area is the city's business professional or BP zone, and that's appropriate for office uses, which is exactly what the property is used for. So that area is consistent. The green area is a planned development or PD zone, which is an obsolete designation the city no longer uses. Basically, there was a time when properties were zoned using parcel or site-specific zoning ordinances instead of using the citywide zoning ordinance. This is unnecessarily complicated because that means if you own that property, you can't look at the city's zoning ordinance to figure out what's allowed on the site. You have to look up this site-specific ordinance by its ordinance number. And oftentimes they're written in a way that's difficult to interpret. In this case, this PD zone states that 3 homes are permitted on this lot. The definition of the city's multifamily zone or R3 zone is 3 or more homes per lot. So we're proposing to rezone this parcel to R3 consistent with what the existing PD zone allows. And as we've already discussed, the long skinny parcel behind this one on South Lincoln has 3 homes on it, but the yellow color indicates it has a single family zoning or R1 designation. That means the use of the land is inconsistent with the zone. So we're proposing this parcel be rezoned to R3 to make it consistent. I should pause here to note that the fact that the use is inconsistent with the zone doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong here. Remember that this is an old area of the city, and all of these parcels and virtually all of the homes were built long before the city even had a zoning ordinance. So that takes us to the last 2 lots, which also have a single family zoning designation. As we discussed, one of these is vacant and is only 1/10 of an acre, and one has just 1 home. So these are consistent with the zone. However, it made sense to us to carry forward the R3 zone to the street rather than have chunks of different zoning there. The R3 zone doesn't require 3 homes, it allows it. So having 1 home on an R3 lot is still a consistent use. Now let's look at the land use for this area. So I think we went too far. Go back to, yep. So this is the existing and proposed land use, and I think the issue here is pretty clear. The entire area has a business professional land use designation, even though most of it is actually residential zoning and residential use. So the primary land use designations applied to residential zoning are low density, medium density, and high density residential. Though most people think about apartments when they hear high density, the use types are defined by their density and not the building type. The property here that has 3 units has a density of 13 units per acre right now, which is consistent with the high density residential land use designation. So at the lower end of the high density range, this is still single family homes. Similarly, the long property to the west would also be at 13 units per acre if developed with 3 units currently permitted by the existing zoning. So we're proposing to amend the land use and apply the HDR or high density residential designation and carry that forward to the street. As you review the land use and zoning maps, you will find that most of the changes are to correct the kinds of inconsistencies that occurred here. Especially in the Atlantic corridor and on Douglas, there's a fair amount of property within existing multifamily zoning designation that has a commercial land use designation or a low density residential land use designation, neither of which are consistent with the zone. So a major city goal for this project is to allow multifamily residential uses within commercial zones. And that's where we expect the majority of the multifamily housing would occur in these plan areas. And that's where we're really trying to facilitate multifamily housing, either through the conversion of long vacant commercial buildings or underused lots and the reuse of oversized parking lots. As part of our outreach, we also asked what kinds of commercial uses residents felt like they needed. So we wanted to make sure all of those uses were permitted. One way to do this would be to rezone commercial property to the city's commercial mixed use zone district. But we realized there were some issues with that because that district permits multifamily residential, but it also permits a wide array of non-residential uses not currently allowed in these corridors, like wholesale trucking and distribution centers and heavy equipment rental. These are not compatible with the vision of the specific plans as communicated to us by you. So the approach we are proposing is to apply a development standards overlay district to the existing commercial zones. That means a property currently zoned CC community commercial would be zoned CC/DS. community commercial with development standards. What the DS zone district does is tell you to look at the specific plan for standards and permitted uses instead of the zoning ordinance. This is actually the same approach which was used in the Riverside Gateway and downtown specific plans. This approach allows us to tailor the list of permitted uses to each plan area. It's also a good idea in an area like this where we will have design standards and other area specific policies, so that when you are determining what's allowed on a given property, you can get everything you need from the specific plan instead of needing to reference both the zoning ordinance and the specific plan. So that covers the land use portion. Before we move on to talking about streetscapes, we wanted to pause and see if you have any questions about the information I just gave you. Gladys will be facilitating this question and answer time, and keep in mind, if we don't have time to get to everyone, or you don't want to ask in a group setting, or you want to have a conversation with us that's going to take some more time, you can send us an email to the project email on the screen. So I will turn it over to Gladys.
Thank you, Lauren. So we have had a very robust discussion in the chat box, and it seems like the participants have been communicating with each other quite a bit, but I'm going to try to get the gist of some of the conversation and pose some questions around what they've been, what the participants have been talking about in the chat box. So maybe just start with Lauren or Jessica. Can you explain why the city, I know you kind of mentioned it at the beginning, but maybe reiterate why the city is choosing these particular corridors to look at to make some modifications in regards to the land use plan?
So these particular areas were selected partly because City Council directed us to, as part of their strategic plan, to focus on some of our aging corridors. And so when we were looking into areas, these areas, because they're gateways, were selected. The boundaries were determined for, because I think that's part of what the sort of question is, why not just these areas, but why are the boundaries where they are? We can adjust those if we get feedback and see reason to do that, because we are still earlier in the process. But for Sunrise, Douglas, and for Douglas and Harding, it was mainly, we were trying to stay mainly close to the commercial areas, and then any parcels alongside where we saw some need to make some corrections or some fixes like we were talking about. With Atlantic Street, there were a number of corrections. One of the things that's an issue there is that all of that open space back there that's zoned open space for the creek back there, the land use is low density residential, and it should not be. So we're looking to fix that. That's one of the big reasons why that corridor was taken all the way down to there, because it gives us an opportunity to fix the land use designations over that open space. And same thing with some of the other neighborhoods in there. A lot of the lots don't actually conform to their existing zoning designation. And that can cause problems for people wanting to do something as simple as add a porch onto the front of their house. So we were looking to fix those things. Again, if anybody wants to have deeper conversations about that, we are happy to talk to you about all of that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Why aren't all of the parcels that are targeted for high density residential proposed to be zoned as such?
I don't think so. All of the, are we asking about why we're having high density or allowing apartments and other high density residential in commercial? Or because in general, we have looked to make sure that anything zoned R3 is going to have a high density residential land use on it. If you've seen a place like that where that's not true, that's an error, and we'd love for you to point that out to us.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just kind of going through, there have been a lot of questions. Why should a low density not be in the Atlantic corridor?
So the Atlantic Street corridor will still have low density on the side. The creek itself will go to an open space land use designation. That's the proposal, because that should not be low density. And then the areas, the lots that are right back against that open space, we are proposing to keep low density residential. The area is sort of in the middle. we could keep that low density residential. That's actually fine if there's sort of consensus in the community to keep that. The zoning though, right now is mostly R1, and we proposed RS because most of those lots aren't consistent with the R1 zone. So we think that changing it to the RS zone would make most of those lots conform, and then would make it easier for people to do things like add a shed or add a front porch without running into problems. Again, we're happy to chat with you more about that. And also, again, if the neighborhood doesn't want that, if we hear a lot of that we were doing because we thought that would help, and we aren't interested in imposing solutions on you that you don't want.
We're getting questions, and then some of the community members are answering it. Someone had asked, what is ours when you were referring to R1, and can you just maybe give a little clarity on that?
Ours just stands for residential. So residential, so the city's residential zones are R1, R2, and R3. R1 has typically meant one house per lot, R2 is duplexes, and R3 is 3 or more units. Perfect. And I think I saw that somebody did clarify that they were asking why multifamily in commercial zones. And the answer is because mixed use is really helpful. We've actually heard from a number of people, including our own city police department, that having some housing on places like Harding would help, because then you would have long-term residents able to sort of observe the areas. So instead of it being a dead zone at night where a lot of illegitimate activity occurs, there would be people who live there with eyes on those areas, and it would make the whole area a little safer.
Thank you. What are the steps and timeline for approval of this project?
So we'll go over that at the end, but we're not looking to publish these plans, the actual complete draft plans, until the summer. So there's still plenty of time if you're really interested to talk to us over the next couple of months.
Great, thank you. How much grant money is the city eligible to receive for moving in this direction?
So we got a grant for $310,000 for the planning. When it comes to subsequent improvements to the public realm, there are a whole lot of grant opportunities for that, but it would sort of depend on the future grant proposals.
So there's been quite a bit of discussion about the newer developments and then these more established neighborhoods, and whether or not there's a requirement to have medium and higher density in the newer developments as well as this. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lauren?
Can you clarify what you mean by newer developments?
Sure. They're saying, so the brand new houses being built to get to stay low density, but not the rest of the area. So I think they're talking about some of the newer developments in West.
I think they're talking about East Street.
Okay.
Oh, you think they're talking about the East Street subdivision?
I think so.
Okay, that project was approved, I think 4 years ago. It's a subdivision map consistent with the land use and the existing land use and zoning there. So it was just a subdivision map. The parcels on there are about the same size or honestly larger. They conform to the R1 zone standards, whereas a lot of the other parcels in there don't. So they're about the same size.
And are they single family?
They are.
Okay, all right. Let's see, the permitted use tables show that high density residential can be put in CC. The housing element targets some specific CC for HDR, for high density residential. Why not just zone it that way to begin with?
So the housing element identified opportunity sites. We specifically wanted to indicate that, so for the purposes of documenting that that was possible, we needed to identify sites we thought were opportunity sites. That's not to say they're the only possible sites. There are sites we think are equally possible and may even have interest on some commercial sites that we didn't identify. So we're trying to maintain flexibility. We don't want to, our goal here is to increase flexibility rather than to decrease it.
Lauren, you cut out just a little bit. I'm sorry, you might want to just close your video.
Okay.
Okay, and would you mind just repeating that last part over?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
And the short answer is we're looking to increase flexibility rather than to decrease it by saying you can only do this one thing. So by saying you could do multifamily throughout the commercial areas along Harding, you have more opportunities than if you said only here.
Okay, Lauren, we do have a number of participants who have been expressing that they have some real concern about having high density in their community. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So what I would say about some of it is it depends on where they're talking about, but we will be putting together design guidelines as part of this project, and we will be communicating with folks about that. And one of the things that design guidelines can do is make sure that there are policies in place that say what a housing development project should look like. So I know some of the concerns that I've heard are on the parcel that's off of South Harding Boulevard about directing traffic. If an apartment complex went in there, directing traffic through the neighborhood. We can have design guidelines that state that traffic should be directed onto South Harding or other, more major thoroughfares, and that pedestrian access should be granted into the back into the neighborhood areas. So we have opportunities to have design guidelines and policies that will make sure that as projects come forward, they're consistent. They provide the housing that we were looking for, but are consistent with our overall vision for how the whole plan should function and look together.
Thank you, Lauren. We have a very specific question. I'm going to go ahead and read it. And then if you wouldn't mind just sort of explaining the legislation that they have referenced, that would be helpful too. So what is the city's position on SB 9 as it relates to this project? And are they planning on pushing back against it and or bringing an action against the state?
So SB 9 was enacted. It became effective on January 1st of this year. So it is passed legislation. And what SB 9 says is that 2 residential homes are allowed on every single family lot. So that is every lot that is zoned R1 or RS. That is the law. So the city is looking to revise our ordinances to be consistent with that new law. There really isn't, it's been enacted. So we need to be consistent with that or be subject to potential lawsuit.
Okay. Again, another very specific question. How many of the 1,791 lower income shortfall is targeted to be met within the corridor's project areas? And are developers in specific plan areas shifting their obligations to the infill?
That is a really good question because honestly, we got that exact same question, but from other folks with different interests, right? So people who own commercial properties or people who own properties out in the west areas, newly developing areas of the city. Everybody wants to make sure, quite fairly, that the burden of getting those units is evenly distributed and isn't being given only to one area of the city or only to one sector of the city. And I can say that it is evenly distributed. So there's about, in that 1,791 in our rezone program, we were looking to get about 900 additional units out in the west area of the city, about 600 more units out of some commercial property conversion, not here, but in other areas of the city. And about 400 units were estimated originally from this process. So we're looking to get a little bit more than that in the Sunrise, in the Douglas Sunrise area at this time, because we have specific interest on a long vacant commercial property. But yes, we're looking at 900, 600, 400. Now we're looking at 800. So it is evenly distributed across multiple strategies.
Thank you, Lauren. Another question, by providing more foot-friendly traffic, does that mean there will be a loss of on-street parking? Lauren, do you want to talk about that?
So we'll get to this a little bit more in the streetscape section, if you will be patient, because I think when we go through those slides, that will answer your question.
Thank you, Lauren. Will the new expedited permitting process for these and other high-density developments be permitted over the counter, or will they allow for residents to participate in public hearings if this or other issues of concern arise?
So the plan is to have some amount of streamlining similar to what's in the downtown specific plan. That is, it's what's called a minor design review permit. It does allow you to appeal and go to hearing, that process does. So it's over the counter unless we receive a request for a hearing, is how the minor design review permit process works.
Thank you, Lauren. I do want to encourage those of you who are whose names are Esme Santana to change their name because you are offering a lot of really good input, but we don't want it to appear that one of AIM's employees is making these comments. So if you wouldn't mind changing your name to it can be just your first name if you like, but if you wouldn't mind changing your name, that would be very helpful. We would appreciate that. And we will be, someone asked early on if we will be capturing all of these comments, and I want to let you know, yes, we will, and it will be part of the summary. It will be in the appendix as well. So just wanted to make sure. So that's why it's helpful to have your name attached to your comment as opposed to Esme's name to your comment. So another comment, I'm sorry, Lauren, you didn't answer my question about SB9. I understand that SB9 has passed and is now law. However, my understanding of this law is it oversteps state authority. My question is the city council's position on SB9, and do they plan on pushing back? Lauren, I don't know if you can answer that question or if it needs to be proposed to the city council, but I'll let you answer.
What I think I'll say at this point, what I'll say at this point is we are taking the SB9 code amendments to City Council this spring to bring them into alignment. The City of Roseville, along with the League of Cities and virtually every jurisdiction in California, opposed this legislation at the time it was moving forward. We aren't looking, as far as I know, at spending additional financial resources on pushing against this at that time, at this time, but that's to my knowledge. I can't speak for City Council.
Okay. Let's see. This question, what kind of offsets or incentives are developers given, for example, the subdivisions in West Roseville for creating high density in central Roseville?
Oh, so often developers of properties, infill properties like this, are completely different from developers of vacant properties. They're completely different development firms and development arms because infill properties like this have a very particular set of needs, including getting financial backing and everything else. So there really isn't an overlap in that way. And the only incentives there will be for developers to build here will be the process streamlining ones we're talking about, and other incentives depending on, like, if you provide public art, for instance, in the downtown plan, there's a provision where you can maybe reduce your parking if you provide a public art benefit. So there may be other things like that, but it will be based on the development, not the developer.
Thank you, Lauren. So, okay, I think you may have answered this question, but I'll ask it again. How much grant money will the city get for this project?
So like I said, we got $310,000 for the planning grant, and that's just for the plan, what we're doing right now, to adopt a specific plan. When it comes to developing housing or redeveloping commercial properties in any way, that is a private development. So that won't be the city. If there's somebody who owns a property here, they would get to decide what, if anything, they would do with their property. When it comes to streetscape improvements, we'll talk about that in the future, but we don't know. You have to apply for an infrastructure grant once you have a project package in place, and every year those grants awards get announced. So we couldn't tell you how much would be available at the time when we would be ready to try for it.
Thank you, Lauren. How is the city going to handle the increased sewage load with the right capacity areas and water demand for the areas with low flows and pressures?
So we do have both of those are technical studies that we are pursuing. So we have a sewer study and a water study ongoing to make sure that we take care of that, to make sure that we've identified whether or not there are any system improvements that need to be made to facilitate redevelopment in these areas.
Okay. We have a very specific question about foot access. So will there be foot access to Marion Wayne Drive with the proposed project at the end of Harding Boulevard?
So there isn't. The answer to that question is we don't have a project proposed there. Right now, all we're doing is looking at the land use. So we would allow multifamily housing on that commercial property. That's not to say that it would be multifamily housing. So what we need to see is in the future, the person who owns that property would decide whether or not they want to pursue a commercial project, housing project, or a mixed use project. And they would bring those plans to us, and then we'd have those conversations. But that's why I went back, I was talking about design guidelines. So design guidelines can help facilitate that conversation in terms of how access should be provided consistent with the guidelines we develop.
I would like to just encourage everyone, we are going to have a lot of differences of opinions about different concepts that are being brought up. And really, we appreciate the fact that you're being very, very accepting of that fact. And we'd like to just keep encouraging that. Let's not call anyone out specifically. Let's keep this a really strong dialogue with the project team. Thank you for that. And then let's see, what is the approval process, the next workshop, etc.?
So are we asking what the future process is for the project?
Correct.
So the next workshops would be held, the plan is that the next workshops would be held on the draft specific plans. That is, after we release the draft specific plans in the summer, then we'd have workshops at Planning Commission and City Council rather than a virtual outreach event like this. We'd agendize it just for a workshop though, not a hearing, at Planning Commission and City Council, so that we can have these kinds of conversations with Planning Commission and City Council, and you all can address Commission and Council as part of that. That said, we will probably have some other types of outreach in between that and now. We might be putting out some surveys as we develop design guidelines and be putting out materials. So I do encourage you to sign up for notifications on the website so that you will get notified when we do any of that work.
Okay, and there's a question about will future meetings be in person? I think one of the reasons we are having these virtual meetings is because we want to encourage as much participation as possible. And there is a concern around the Omicron and, sort of impacts to that. So I think this is, I think this kind of lowers that barrier to people being involved. But Lauren, did you want to address any of the future meetings?
So I really can't say, because as you know, one of the reasons why, like right now we're having in-person Planning Commission and Council meetings, I believe. So I don't see that changing, but as we all know through the unspoken thing that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years, I can't make guarantees, but right now those meetings are being held in person.
Okay, great. How far into the future is it going to be until we actually see mock-ups or what plans are for various areas? How far into the future are we trying to look at here?
So a specific plan tends to be like a 10 or 20 year long range plan. And so, like I said, when we're talking about redevelopment of a commercial property or development of a housing project, that would be a private property owner coming forward to us with an application. And so that'll be on their timeline rather than ours. We would hope, though, that over the next 8 to 10 years, we would see some projects come forward as a result of this.
Great. So before we move on to providing an overview of the streetscapes, I wanted to see if anybody would like to raise their virtual hand and ask questions or comments to the project team. If not, then we will move on to the streetscape presentation, but I wanted to just put a little pause button and see if anybody would like to raise their virtual hand. And just as a friendly reminder, to raise your virtual hand, you just need to go to the bottom of your screen. You can either, if you're on a tablet or a phone, it's the 3 dots and you click that and you'll see a raised hand comment. You can hit that, or if you're on a computer, it's the reactions button. You can click that and just pretty much hit any of those, and we will know that you would like to make a comment. And it looks like Craig Garb gave a thumbs up, so I'm assuming that's possibly that he'd like to unmute and ask a question. Yep, I got a real thumbs up. So Katie, if you wouldn't mind asking to unmute him.
Well, greetings. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time that you're taking and presentation. And I know how difficult these can be. Although at this point, I'm only speaking for myself. I am the coordinator of the Garbalino Park Neighborhood Watch, had formerly been the president of the Hillcrest Neighborhood Association with Arcona. I work for the state as a consultant myself. So again, I know how difficult it can be doing these virtual sessions and being able to moderate things, keeping up with the questions in the chat and everything like that. So first of all, I just want to say thank you very much. I appreciate it. I know you're in a really tough position. I know a few thoughts and another question here is one, I know that there were a lot of other questions in the chat that was filling up really quickly. I know you'll be getting back to people, but I think there's also some other really good questions in there. And I know that several of the neighbors that I have spoken to in this area are extremely concerned about this, particularly with, I think they're calling it the Loft Project, which was at Keener and Douglas. They're right off of Nevada Avenue, and again, putting up that large structure. And so the neighbors here are very much, all the more organizing. This clearly is a trigger issue. And so being able to very carefully spell out the future process will be a real help, particularly details on public comment and things like that. So a few questions related to the foot traffic, where this is one of the benefits in terms of being able to make that happen is, what impact will that be on loss of lanes, constriction of traffic? I know particularly with the Riverside project, there were real negative impacts, particularly for the businesses right along there, and even ingress and egress out of a lot of those side streets like Bonita, Cherry, and some of the others, made it very difficult, a lot of damage to automobiles. So what are going to be, if you increase foot traffic, what are the impacts on car traffic?
So is your question about what if we reduce the size of travel lanes? Is that what you're asking about?
Well, yeah, the question is, does increased foot traffic mean decreased car traffic? And how are you going to increase that? Where's that space going to come from?
So we'll get to this when we start talking streetscapes in the next portion, but we aren't talking, the city's right of way is where it is right now. We are not talking about roadway engineering solutions or getting rid of travel lanes to convert them into something else in these areas. So we aren't looking at changes of that scale in any of these areas.
Okay. The other question is, have you done any traffic studies, particularly at full build out, and you go in with all this high density? Of course, that's going to significantly increase the number of people, cars, where they're going to park. And does this also include a change to the, the parking ordinances in terms of how many parking places that need to be on site versus off site?
So there was a traffic study done as part of the housing element itself. We actually updated the entire citywide traffic model to include not just the units in these commercial corridors that we were hoping to get from this project, but also the units that, the number that was thrown out, the deficit of 1,791 units, that's citywide. So yeah, there was a citywide traffic study done for all of the major intersections and roadways in the city, including all of the units from the housing element programs, not just the commercial corridors. So it's a good cumulative look.
And what were the outcome of those studies? What is the percent increase in impacts and traffic flows, queue stacks, and all the rest?
I mean, I'd have to go look at the details for each, intersection, but it did not worsen the city. The city's policy for intersections is that at least 70% of our intersections should be operating at level of service C or better, and we did not trigger that threshold. There wasn't a huge change in the percent that would be operating worse than LOSC. Level of service is what LOS is. Sorry, everyone.
And then are those traffic studies available online?
Yeah, we have the housing element webpage is roseville.ca.us/housing element. And the environmental document for that is on that website.
Okay, if possible, if you could put that link in the
Yeah,
chat.
I was just going to say
would be
that.
helpful.
We'll go ahead and put that in the chat for you, Craig. And thank you so much for your questions. Do you have any others, or can we move on?
Last one, and this was one of the questions somebody else had asked. How come you're not putting any of the high density housing out there in West Roseville, and why is it all concentrated in Central Roseville?
So I'm not sure we are. There is every new specific plan out in the west area of Roseville is split pretty evenly. About 30% of the units are high density, about 30% of the units are medium density, and about 35% are low density residential. So every specific plan, we look to have sort of a balanced mix of high density, medium density, and low density residential. And as I mentioned with the housing element programs, those units we're looking for are also distributed between those developing areas of the city, some of the commercial areas of the city, and then these corridor areas. As well as
and then just to follow up to that, and I'll be done here. And again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your effort here. Is out there in the West Roseville specific plan with all the subdivisions, are those also being zoned R3 in a similar zoning and so forth as we are seeing here in Central Roseville?
So all multifamily sites out in the specific plans are zoned R3. Yes.
Thank you very much, Craig, for all of your questions and your comments. We appreciate that. Okay, so we are going to move on to an overview of the streetscapes. I know many of you had some questions regarding that. So Lauren, can I turn it over to you?
Okay, so let's move on and talk about the streetscapes. I know we've already gotten some questions about that. So first, what do we mean when we use the term streetscape? The streetscape is the design quality of the street from building to building and its visual impact and your experience of it. It isn't just the paved road. So when we talk about streetscapes, we aren't focused on roadway engineering. We're talking about lighting design and landscaping, comfort, and overall mobility. That's especially true in built environments like this. In new growth areas like the western areas of the city we were talking about, you have room to decide exactly how wide the right of way, that is the area owned by the city, which includes the sidewalk and landscaping on either side of the road, how wide that needs to be to create a good streetscape experience, because it's greenfield. There's nothing out there yet. You have the room to make that plan. Here, the right of way is already set. And in many cases, there are buildings and other private property improvements right up against the edge of that right of way. So we have to take a dual approach to this. We examine the right of way areas and figure out what we can do within the existing public realm to improve the experience of the corridor, because we're not expanding the right of way, and then also develop design guidelines for private realm commercial redevelopment projects. Over time, as the city identifies grant or other funding to make improvements, and as commercial properties along it are improved, the quality of the streetscape will go up. It's a long-range plan. So what kind of options do we have to make improvements? So listed here are some of the things we could do, along with some inspirational images. Now, keep in mind, under each bullet point, there are a lot of options, but I'm just going to walk through and give an example for each one. So, for instance, crosswalk, So at crosswalk and corner enhancements, we are talking about potentially like decorative paving through the crosswalk, like you see sometimes in downtown. Transit stop enhancements, we could be looking at a refreshed new bus shelter. Landscape enhancements could include updating older landscaping. Sidewalk improvements could include removing obstacles from the paved sidewalk width. Center turn lane and raised median enhancements could again include different pavement options. Pedestrian lighting is where we're talking about lighting that is not for the street, but is actually a smaller scale and decorative and is intended to light pedestrian pathways. Wayfinding and identity signage, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. And then gateway elements are like, prominent entry areas to the city or prominent corners, and whether or not you put like a monument there or different landscaping. So moving forward. So this is an example streetscape section. And it isn't a specific section of a specific street because we aren't creating construction documents. These are conceptual plans laying out our options that we can include in the specific plan. As you can perhaps see, it shows a 4-lane road with a center turn lane or median, sidewalks, landscaping, corners where a side street connects to the main road, and other features. In the final version, numbered callouts will be added that correspond to a list of improvement options. For example, the call out for a bus stop or waiting area will take you to a list of options like public art, site furnishings, and shade trees. Then in future, the city can look at these sections, make selections from the options based on funding, and put together a grant application for improvements. So as we move forward with the conceptual streetscape options, we're looking for your feedback on which options you'd like us to prioritize. We're going to do a live poll now, listing some of those options and asking you to select the ones you think should be highest priority.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so yes, we are going to be doing a live polling, and Katie, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the first question of the live poll. Katie, I'm not seeing it. Maybe you could unmute. Okay, thank you. All right, so the first question, and if you want to take a look at the photos and the polling question is covering it, you can just pick that up with your cursor and move it over so you can look at the images as well, because I know mine's covering it. So the first question is, which 2 improvement types do you consider the highest priority? Crosswalk enhancements, median enhancements, decorative lighting, street furniture, or landscaping? And if you have an other, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat box, we would appreciate it. Again, we won't necessarily go over the others here verbally, but we will be capturing your comments, and we will make sure they are shared with the project team. Okay. Well, thank you for your input on that. We'll move on to question number 2. Okay, so which 2 gateway improvement types do you consider the highest priority? Monuments, decorative pavement, signage, art, landscaping, or landscape features? Or you can have an other and add that to the chat box. Okay. Great, thank you. And we are getting some wonderful comments in the chat box too. I have been monitoring that as well, so thank you for that. Our third question is, would you like to have a public mural or public art program in these areas? And then simply yes or no. If you want to enhance your question, you can certainly add additional comments in the chat box. Katie, let's just give it a tad more time, not shut it down quite so quickly. Did you shut this one down already? Okay. Okay. And our fourth question is, what kind of public art are you interested in? Murals, sculptures, art applied to utilitarian structures such as trash enclosures, or other? And please add your other in the chat box. Yeah, if we could leave it up for maybe just like a minute, Katie, I would appreciate that. Thank you. I know it seems like a long time, but we got to give people a chance to consider. Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. And if you wouldn't mind sharing the results. All right. Well, thank you for that. That was very helpful. Okay, with that, I think we've asked our questions, and we would we'd like to put a little pause button on our presentation and open it up for questions and comments from you. We had lots of comments responding to the others, so I won't go through those. But if anybody, I haven't seen any questions related to Lauren's presentation that in the chat box, but I will give it a few minutes and see if any pop up, or if you would like to ask your questions yourself, please raise your virtual hand, and we will we'd be more than happy to unmute you and give you that opportunity. Okay, one came through. How much of the project is congruent, if at all, with the existing SACOG guidelines? And SACOG is the Sacramento Area Council of Governments guidelines. Do they inform or influence this project at all? And if so, which ones? Lauren, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure how to approach that one. I will say we haven't looked at, if you're asking like about the SACOG blueprint or anything like that, we didn't look at that in order to come up with these projects. We were looking at this project mainly because, like I said, we all recognize that these are older areas of the city that really could use some love and attention. And the city council was looking for us to do that. So no, we haven't really looked at SACOG's blueprint or anything like that in order to determine what this project was going to be.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Does anybody else have any comments or questions they'd like to share with the project team? I don't want to rush it. So I'll just pause. Friendly reminder that if you want to raise your virtual hand, because we can't always see you. We have a large number of people who are participating. I can't always see you on your video. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, all you have to do is go to the bottom of your screen, find the reactions button or the three dots, and raise your virtual hand, or any image that will pop you up.
So I will just say I did see a question pop up on the bottom asking why we're not looking at roadway engineering. And the answer here is that is a very complicated and long-term type of process to go through that. If anybody followed the downtown specific plan, where they did a lot of that, really re-envisioned how the roadways operated, that plan took more than 5 years. We are not looking to spend all of that time and money on doing that at this point. We're looking to do what we can to reinvigorate and revitalize these areas without taking away from anyone's existing beneficial experiences. So we understand that there are some folks who would really like to see, for instance, bike lanes, but that comes at a cost in terms of travel lanes. So right now we are just looking at streetscape improvements that are focused on your experience of the areas rather than roadway engineering.
Okay. We did get a question about where do you get the 402 page housing element?
So we put the link to the housing element website in the chat. And again, the short for that, oh, there it is.
There it is.
Short link version is back in the chat.
Thank you, Shelby. Teamwork.
I will say though that this project was folded into the housing element rather than the other way around. This project, we knew we wanted to do this project before we started the housing element rather than after.
Okay. Oh, we do have a question or comment. Melody Furman has raised her hand. Katie, could you request to unmute? Oh, you have, great. And Melody, you are unmuted. Would you?
Thank you. Thank you everyone for inviting all of us and the community to participate. My question, since I lived on the south end of Nevada, exiting into Douglas, I think a majority of our neighbors that I've talked to is in this planning session, how much is the infrastructure going to be updated before we make everything look pretty? And when I say that is The sewage lines that go down Nevada, they are incoming from everything that exits from Roseville Square. So our street has not been paved or had the infrastructure underneath for sewage and water upgraded in the last 50 years. I'm a long-term homeowner here and know this for a fact. So the city is out here weekly trying to unclog everything that comes from the square down Nevada. And now that we have the loft project also going to be going into the same sewage line. So my question really is not only transportation, far as the lighting. We've always asked for a three-way light at Keener, Douglas, Nevada, because there is a lot of accidents that happen here. And any of the city events that happen downtown, all the traffic is diverted down our street. And a lot of out-town guests don't know that if they're going to make a left-hand turn from Nevada onto Douglas, that light looks red to them, but the oncoming traffic, it's still green. And we have a lot of accidents. So a lot of the infrastructure in this little corridor needs to be addressed. And I'm not sure in this specific plan that that's going to become a part of it.
So we do have, as I mentioned earlier, we do have technical studies underway for both sewer conveyance and water conveyance. So we are looking at technical studies for that, so that if there are facilities that would need to be upgraded in order to facilitate redevelopment in these areas, that will be identified so that we can have a plan to address that. And then, you know, I know that there was a lot of discussion about that signal there, and I'm not one of the city's traffic engineers, so I can't speak to that item specifically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you.
And thank you, Melody, for asking your question. We appreciate that. Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, we will move on then. We're going to provide sort of the next steps of this project and maybe give a little history about where we've been and where we're going. So Lauren?
Yeah. So we launched this, the planning effort in May of last year, and it will continue through this year. So our goal is to create plans that will facilitate improved quality of life and ensure the long-term sustainability and vibrancy of these areas. The first event was for community visioning. We are now at the concept stage where we've developed a land use plan and some draft streetscape concepts, as these are two linchpins for the plan. We'll be taking into account your feedback and develop draft specific plans we hope to publish this summer. The specific plans will include land use plans, streetscape concepts, and design guidelines. At that point, instead, as I mentioned, of a virtual workshop, our plan is to hold community workshops at a city planning commission meeting and at a city council meeting. These will be informational workshops, not hearings. There we go. And then final drafts of each plan will be prepared and released, we hope, in the fall, after which the plans would go to the city's planning commission and city council for public hearings, recommendation, and hopefully approval. So I just want to repeat before Gladys sort of takes us through our goodbyes that we expect to be potentially reaching out with some additional surveys or some additional materials between now and the release of the draft plans in the summer. So please, 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 if you are interested in the project, go to the website on this screen and sign up for updates so that when we release updates, when we release surveys, you will get notification, because we do want public participation in this project, absolutely. And if you have any comments or concerns that you don't feel like were gotten to tonight and you want to contact us, feel free to email us. And we will be absolutely happy to talk to you about your issues and work through that with you.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And we'll just leave this up for just another minute or so, so that you can write that down. And again, if you're attending this meeting, if you registered for it, then we most likely have your email and you've been added to the database, but we highly encourage you to also, again, sort of use that email to ask further questions or make additional comments. Please visit the website. And that will be updated as well. And if you're a social media user, the city has a Facebook page, they have a Twitter account, they have an Instagram, and they have Nextdoor. So many ways of staying in contact with the city as well. So with that, again, we just want to thank you so much. Thank you for the very productive and robust discussion in the chat box. It was great to see everybody, you know, kind of being within community, even if we're in a virtual space. So we really, really appreciate that. And thank you for all of your really good questions and your comments and your observations. I'm a firm believer in community making any plan or project better if they're involved. So thank you so much for all of your participation. And with that, we'll let you go and enjoy your rest of your evening. Thank you so much.